first one I want to look at is Kekai Kotaki, who is the lead concept artist at ArenaNet, who's famous for their Guild Wars games, 1 and 2. And when you look at his site, it's predominantly fantasy concept art, both character work and landscapes and environments and backgrounds, that kind of thing. And they all have this very surreal, very high contrast look to it. And it's very, very like a quick, painterly kind of, but highly detailed work that he does. And so when you look not only at his Guild Wars concepts, but his personal work and commissioned illustrations, they all have that consistency or that unique characteristic about his work. And so it's no surprise that it's predominantly concept art for Guild Wars, and when you look at his resume, that's the top thing on his work experience. So there's no surprise in terms of the correlation there. And now let's look at another concept artist, Feng Zhu. And Feng, I would say, is definitely known for his environments, technical precision with that. And the thing with his work, again, it's when you look at his site, it's predominantly fantasy and sci-fi, and it's loose. Okay, so it's not like, when you look at it closely, it's not these very tight, rounded, smooth edges and things like that. No, he's about showing these grandiose and epic scenarios and landscapes, and putting them down and finishing very quickly. So they have this certain looseness to them, yet they're very dramatic and have a lot of detail. And with concept art, that's important because, again, you're trying to generate really sound ideas, but quickly. So whereas it would take the time, however time to do one fully polished environment, Feng would crank out like 5 to 10 with a looser style to it, yet still have all the detail and visual flair to it. And again, when you think of size and resolution, normally when you do something very tight and polished for marketing or promotion, or maybe it's going to be on large surfaces or banners, so they has to be really polished. But a lot of times with concept art, they only have to be a certain size. So even if you work at a large scale with very quick, rough brush strokes, when you shrink it down, it becomes tighter and the idea becomes even more crystallized. So Feng also does characters and machines and weapons and things like that, but definitely I would say it's his environments and backgrounds is what he's known for. Andy Park is interesting because I remember seeing Andy Park stuff in the 90s for Image Comics, which he did Tomb Raider. And his style, I'd say, was probably very influenced by other artists around that time, like Mark Silvestri and the late great Michael Turner. And if you look at his comic work back then and his current stuff, you would say is a totally different artist. And the thing with Andy is he went from comics and eventually became a concept artist, and you can see that evolution of his work and how it's represented. So things like God of War, which was a very popular game franchise, a lot of fantasy-based work that he's done, and more recently for the Avengers movie, the highly anticipated Avengers movie, the promo work for Nick Fury, who's played by Sam Jackson, and so obviously he had to get the likeness down. It's very polished, and in that case that's an illustration as opposed to concept art because it's for promotional purposes. It had to be very tight, probably has to be very large resolution because they're going to use it on posters or whatever for promotions. So even on his site you can see it broken down to concept art, illustration, and comic art. And even if you see the same subject matter, you say, well, I see a character from God of War in his concept art, and then some more God of War stuff in illustration. What's the difference? Well, again, in the concept art section, that was the whole design process. It was all about iterating and coming up with the right design for the monsters and things like that. Whereas the illustration, it's a certain type of polish to it. It's probably used to either, it could be used for concept, but more like showcasing this is the final design and we want to see a final clean, pretty version to really set up the character. Or it could be for promotional, whether for the game itself, for the box art, or for magazines and that kind of thing. And so that's Andy Park's work. Now, complete contrast, and not necessarily game related, but still concept art as far as characters go, is Steven Silver, who is self-taught, by the way. When you look at his site, it's very, very obvious and very specific what he does. It's all very stylized, cartoony, and pretty much character work. And when you get that specialized, you're sought after for it. One thing I didn't mention earlier is, as a concept artist, of course, the wider or more versatile you are in terms of what you can draw in your styles is good. But at the same time, you still need to find some kind of niche or focus, whether it's your strength in the type of work it is, whether it's a character work or environment, but also in your style. And when you have people like this who are very specific and very specialized, some may say, well, that's limiting. Well, on the other hand, it may seem that way, but again, they have a huge spectrum or portfolio within that specialization. So even though it's all characters and it's all specifically cartoony, he showcases a whole gamut, a whole spectrum of them. Again, he's known for specifically cartoons like Kim Possible. Usually when someone is looking for Steven Silver, it's because it's his specific style, and as well, of course, of his experience and all the work that he's done. Similarly, I would say Dan Krall is another one of those types of character artists and illustrators who have done work for animation like Samurai Jack and Dexter's Lab, that sort of thing, as well as film and comics. But when you look at his site, again, it has his own kind of flair, where you could, if on a general terms, you could say both him and Steven Silver do very cartoony stylized work, particularly for characters and for cartoons, television animated series. Yet their styles are very different. So that's how you can differentiate between their work. I guess finally, and just to kind of bring things back home, take a look at some of my work, which is hard to follow up all these great artists. But even in my case, my work and my site has changed. I don't just say concept artist, I say concept artist and illustrator, because that's what I do now. Whereas in the past it was predominantly concept art because I was working for Pseudo. But now that I've been freelancing and I do both, my work and my resume reflects that. So when you look at my site, you see some concept art directed at games, but as well as you see kind of illustration that's meant more for comics or animation or that sort of thing. Say for example, I'll do a cover for a band or CD cover, and then some toy concept art, and then maybe some actual character work for a game. And those are all seemingly different sectors of industry. However, if I were able to show you the work I did, which I can't because I'm under non-disclosure, but there's a certain kind of similar thread. All three of these particular clients were looking for a style similar to what I do, what was appealing to them. Most of that work I get are predominantly work for video games still, but whether it's for toys or for pen and paper games or whatever, usually it's for character design for whatever reason, and usually it's stylized or exaggerated as opposed to very realistic. So that's kind of become what I guess is the strength of my work. Part of it is because that's what I like to do, but also it's how it's received, and that's something you don't necessarily always have control over, and so you have to kind of play to both. That's where my work is coming from.